There's not a fear. No one's there yet. No one's there yet. Well, I don't know what happened. Well, really, if they're keeping us not. They should have something. Yeah. No, that's not.
Welcome, everyone. Hello. I am Crystal Hopper-Myers, and I am our new LIFT project administrator here at SWOCC. Previously with leading our STEAM pathways, but I'm still going to be overseeing that program. Soon you might see a new face over here helping with that. We appreciate you all coming here today. Welcome to our online guest as well. Right now, we have some online viewers who may have some questions. If you just want to type in those, I'll be able to share that with our guest later. We ask that we will do questions kind of at the end of our presentation. I'm really excited to, well, first see lots of our professors here. So if you have questions in pretty much any area, we have a professor in this room right now. So we have several of them here. I always like to kind of give a shout out to our SPEAR student research team. They've been really active this year and doing a lot of various forms of research. One of our big projects was focused on Fossil Point. And that project actually we had funding come in from Oregon NASA Space Grant Consortium with a faculty research award that was led by Dr. Wynn McLaughlin, who's over here. And it was a collaboration of actually also with Professor Morelli. We had our marine biology professor, Amy Burgess, and Dr. Coiner with physics. So we had a variety of different students jump in on that project, and they were able to actually present their work recently at Oregon State. So we're always excited to see our team active with that. On top of our OSGC, which is our space grant, we always like to say thank you to them and to the Oregon Coast STEM Hub. Oregon Coast STEM Hub has provided us with funding to be able to have our high school STEM internship program that we started this past year. We had about 3 students during that time, and we will be having about 5 this summer and 2 this coming fall that's going to be working with their faculty mentors, being able to do research. They also get to jump in and help us with some of our K-12 and community outreach. So it's a lot of fun. Our planetarium, our portable planetarium, you've probably seen around town, stays very, very active. It's been out at the libraries. It's been at various schools. If you haven't got a chance to see it, it's been awesome. That wasn't, we wouldn't even have that planetarium if it wasn't for our community. So we always want to say thank you. We had a local community member make a donation for half of that. And then the City of North Bend, Three Rivers Foundation, our SWOCC Foundation all jumped in to make that possible. And it has been a very, very active program. With that said, I wanted to hand the mic over to Professor Derek Morelli, our chemistry professor here, to introduce our guest tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. So welcome tonight. I just wanted to do a very brief introduction. We have 3 excellent speakers to talk about the art and science of brewing beer, winemaking, and distilling rum. I thought this talk would be great, showing the kind of like involvement of chemistry in so many varied things and how it's connected to so many things in life. So we have Annie Pollard from Devils Brewing, who's going to be talking about the process of brewing. We have Veronica Viramontes from Gallo Winery talking about winemaking. And we have Richard Stillwagon from Stillwagon Distillery to talk about the process of making rum. So having said that, I'd like to invite Annie up first to talk about brewing beer.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be here today. I always love an opportunity to talk about making beer. Let me just see if I can navigate this thing. Yes. Okay. So I started making beer in 2002. There's a picture of me sampling my first beer up there. In 2002, I was 20 or about to turn 20, which might give you a clue as to why I felt compelled to make my own beer instead of buying it, right? But for the next 10 years, I got really into it, even though I could at that point buy it. And then in 2013, I had met my husband, and he also was a home brewer independently of me meeting him. We opened a brewery. There's a picture of our brewery there. And since then, it's grown a bit. I took the broom down. Back in the 1600s, women brewers would put a broom above their house when they had beer ready. And so now we associate brooms with witches. So whenever anybody refers to me as a witch, I always take it as a compliment because it makes me feel bonded to the brewsters that came before me. Okay, a little bit more about the science of brewing. This team of men and one woman have all worked in my brewery over the years. I think we're missing only one person that has worked in the brewery that just wasn't here the day that we ran into all these fine people on the patio and forced them to take a picture with us. They didn't work all at the same time. We usually work with like a 3-person crew. Now, they all look like hardworking individuals, but I'm here to tell you today that brewers do everything they can to pawn off their work on enzymes and also yeast. So I'm going to mostly talk about the enzymatic work that gets done, and I hope that some of the other speakers today will talk about the yeast work. Okay, go. All right, so a quick review of what makes alcohol. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. Fermentation makes alcohol. Basically, you take sugar, you add water, and you add yeast, specifically Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and you get alcohol and CO2. We want both in our beer, not just the alcohol. We want CO2 as well. Unfortunately, the yeast does that for us, so we don't have to add CO2, although many brewers do add CO2 later. If you wanted to, you could let yeast do really all the work on carbonation as well as the fermentation alcohol. But what is sugar? Why is sugar important, or where does it come from? Carbohydrates are sugars, and it's how plants store their energy, as I'm sure you all know. But there's 2 different forms of carbohydrates. We have simple carbs, and that's sugars. It tastes sweet. It's dissolvable in liquid. It's dissolvable on our tongue. But then there's also complex carbohydrates, and that's when you eat bread, anything that comes from a seed. That's a complex carbohydrate. This is very important to me because I make beer, and people who make beer want complex carbohydrates. The simple stuff, that's for the cider makers, that's for the wine makers. They let the plant just make simple sugars, and then they add yeast and wait. That's all they have to do. Maybe it's a little more complicated than that. But my job is a little bit harder because yeast won't eat complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are not water soluble. It's a very good way to be able to store your energy if you're a plant for future use, because if it gets a little wet, it's going to be okay. But my yeast doesn't know what to do with long chain carbohydrates. So that is why we need enzymes. So I think I already talked about mostly that. Okay, so where are we getting these long chain carbohydrates? We're mostly getting it from seeds. as opposed to something like fruit, which primarily has simple sugars. So brewers typically use barley, but you can make beer out of all sorts of different grains. So you'll see rice, you'll see corn, you'll see wheat, and a bunch of other sorghum, all sorts of things. But it's got to be a seed that intends to be a plant one day. And you'll find out why next. So here's a barley field being harvested. And here's the anatomy of a barley corn. So I don't have a pointer, but you can read the labels there. There's a hull. Inside the hull is the bran, which is basically we call it a husk. Inside that is an endosperm, and that's where all the complex carbs are stored. And then there's the germ. The germ is what's gonna be the plant one day. The germ is what will sprout eventually when the seed finds the right conditions. So the plant is storing all this carefully hoarded energy from the sun, hoping that its offspring is going to be able to use that to grow later. And that's essentially what I use. But I can't just go out there and collect a bunch of barley and expect to make beer out of it, because the yeast doesn't know what to do with that. So we actually contract with maltsters to give us grain that is actually usable. So these guys on this big floor with brooms wandering around, they don't get very much credit for making beer. But I'm here to tell you that they do at least a third of the work. Without what they do first, there's no way that I could make beer. Even if I had a whole bunch of barley, it would be very hard for me to efficiently make beer out of that. So these guys are wandering around with brooms and watering cans, and they get no credit. But they do something really cool. And actually, this is actually what they do. They don't have the watering cans anymore. They work in a facility like this, and this is a maltings, and North America has about 5 of these. And all of the barley farmers in North America send their seeds to one of these factories. And a factory I actually had the pleasure of touring this one in Minnesota. There might be 20 people working there. It is huge. These silos are massive. You can't even really see the vehicles. The vehicles are like a regular car is like up in the corner. You can't hardly see them in comparison to how huge these silos are. And yet, you might only have a handful of people working there. It feels like a ghost town when they're actively making all the malted barley that you need to make America's beer. It's amazing how much they can churn. So cool. So what do? They take the barley corns that the farmers have sent them, and of course the farmers do a lot of cool stuff too, but I don't know as much about that. They take these seeds and they have to sprout them. And that's a process called germination. And the reason that they want to sprout the seeds is that sprouting action cause the baby barley seed to create enzymes that I need. So these enzymes get released, and those enzymes have a purpose. The plant wants those enzymes to break up those long chains of carbohydrates into simple sugars that the plant can then use. Because the plant, just like us, we prefer glucose molecules to be able to grow. That's great for the plant, but what happens when you let a plant grow? It eats all the carbohydrates in the seed and then creates leaves and starts making its own carbs. As a brewer, I don't want that to happen. Because, there's a picture of an enzyme. Okay. Because I need the sugar. I don't want the plant to use the sugar. So I'm going to use those enzymes. I'm going to use the sugar, but I can't use it immediately after sprouting. So the little seed sprouts. And if you let it grow into a plant, there's no sugar left. So the maltsters have to very, very, very carefully choose the time to stop that action, to stop life from growing. So once they sprout the seeds and the little roots start to form, they will very carefully dry the barley, the malted barley at this point, to kill the germ. So the germ dies, the little roots blow away. They basically just kind of cook off. And at that point, the enzymes are still intact, the ones that I want. The sugar is still mostly there. The plant hardly used any of it. And at that point, you can store it because there's no liquid in it. It's not going to mold. You can put it in bags and you can ship it to all the little breweries and all the big breweries all over North America and sometimes overseas. So let's see. That's the next picture though there. And so on the floor here, you can see the barley being dried in a giant kiln. And then off to the right, you can see, let's see, there's different colors of malted barley. And the stuff that I make beer out of typically is here. This is where I'm getting my alcohol. The reason that I also occasionally buy darker malts, these malts have been left in the kiln a little longer and they have nice, lovely caramelization or roasting things happen. Lovely for flavor in beer. However, the enzymes die if you heat up the barley too warm. So we very carefully choose which malts we want. Mostly we're using just the dried stuff rather than the roasted stuff or the caramelized stuff. But then we'll buy these things if we want darker beers or sweeter beers, etc. So if you're going to do like a stout, you would do a higher percentage of this, but even so, you wouldn't go above something like 10%. You'd still need mostly the lighter roasted stuff or just kiln dried stuff. Okay, so that's me in my garage using that dried malted barley. You got to hydrate it to get these things working again. So the enzymes, and I think briefly I had, let's see if I can go back for a second. You can picture an enzyme as like a ball of molecules. It's a protein. Basically, these things are created by all living things to do one job. There's all different enzymes, but they only ever do one thing. They each have one specific thing that they do. And in this case, I have about 2 enzymes, and they do a very specific thing, and they just cut carbohydrates into smaller pieces. Okay, so when you dry it, it still maintains its shape. It still is going to do the thing that it does if it's allowed to get near the thing that it does. So the way that we do that is we make an aqueous solution. So we have to break the corns in half or in maybe 4 or 5 pieces using a grinder, and then we add water, and the enzymes will start to chew away on those carbohydrates. This usually takes days if you're just going to use room temperature water. The ancient Egyptians would do this over a period of days. But we have learned in the last few hundred years that if you warm up the solution to around 154 degrees, both of those enzymes work way faster at doing what they do. So instead of waiting for the enzyme to slowly bump into a piece of carbohydrate and cut it in half, these things are just chopping, chopping, chopping. So they'll chop, release, chop, release. So an individual enzyme protein will just chop away and make a ton of little sugar molecules. So this is kind of how that works. There's 2 enzymes. There's alpha amylase, which is up at the top. And what alpha amylase does, it binds to the middle of a longer chain of carbs and just cuts it. And then there's another enzyme called beta amylase, and it chews off 2 glucose molecules at a time, which is actually something called maltose. So it can attach to the very end of a carbohydrate chain and chop off a little maltose molecule. Both of these working together is what makes the nicest beer. It's the quickest action you can get, so that you're not wasting a bunch of time waiting. So brewers use both of them. There's other enzymes too that can do other things, but those are the 2 that we really prefer. And then from there, yeast can eat maltose happily. Okay, I drew this today. It's kind of a terrible drawing. Sorry about that. So on the one side, you can see my representation of long chain carbohydrates. And then if you add water, and in my case, heat as well, the enzymes go nuts and they start breaking all these carbs into little tiny pieces. And the little tube, each ball is supposed to represent like a glucose molecule. And when 2 are together, that's a maltose molecule. Either of those, the yeast are happy to eat. But when you get into the 3 and 4 chunks, and even the little branching chunks, the yeast can't eat that. But humans can taste it and break it down on our own tongues, and it tastes sweet. So if we didn't leave some of those bigger pieces of carbs in the solution, the beer would be very, very, very dry and more alcoholic. You would have all of that sugar being turned into alcohol, and your beer wouldn't taste like very much. So brewers like to have a little bit of that going on, and we can kind of play with which enzyme is working most to get either a higher ratio of those bigger pieces or a smaller ratio. And so when I say that enzymes do all the work, while we're sitting around waiting for this to happen, we do have a few decisions to make in terms of how warm we make the water that we add. That's it. That's what we do. Okay, and this is my last slide. I don't have time to go through any of the other steps in very much detail, so we've really only gone through steps 1, which we don't even do, right? We hire the guys with the brooms to do that. And then the mashing, which is where we're adding hot water to the grist. And then from there, we have to drain all that liquid off. We rinse the leftover malted barley and take that liquid as well. We send it over to the kettle where we boil it. From there, we have to rapidly chill it down. If we don't do it rapidly, there's all these issues that happen with oxygen contaminating your wort. Beer is called wort before yeast gets to it. So we rapidly chill it, at which point we can add the yeast. We also add a little bit of oxygen to help the yeast reproduce in the very early stages so that there's enough cells to do the work. And then from there, the yeast just go nuts and they just eat up all that lovely fermentable sugar that we used the enzymes to get. And then after about 3 days, we have beer at that point. We can lauter it at that point. We can lager it, sorry. We let it clarify. That can take anything from like a week to 3 months, you know, for a lager. Sometimes we'll do 3 months and then carbonate it up, or we can naturally carbonate it using the enzyme or the yeast action if we want, fermentation action. And then you put it in kegs and bottles, and that's basically it. All those steps that I just ran through have a lot more chemistry to them that I completely left out. So sorry for that. I think we're going to do questions at the end, but thanks y'all for listening to me.
Hello, everybody. I'm Veronica Viramontes, and today I'm so excited to teach you about the basics of wine. So before I get started, I want to let you know a little bit about me. I'm from Lodi, California. If you guys don't know where that is, it's in the San Joaquin Valley. Like the CCR song, I did get stuck there, all for great reason. I grew up in the wine industry. My family's been living there for about 40 years. And I loved it so much, I decided to go to Fresno State and pursue a degree in enology. I'm currently a winemaker at Gallo. I've been there for about 3 years. I'm currently a beef leader for the local 4-H in my town. I don't know if anybody knows what 4-H is. And when I'm not helping the 4-H kids and I'm not making wine, I get bossed around by my very chunky professional cat named Tater. He does have a tie and he wears a tuxedo every day. Some of the brands that I've worked on currently and in the past, at Gallo are Black Box Wines, Gallo Family Wines, Barefoot, Dark Horse, Carlo Rossi, and Apothic. So before we get started, I want to play a little trivia, test your wine knowledge, and kind of see what you guys know. So how many gallons? Oh, I do have prizes. For those of you online, sorry, have to be present to win. So how many gallons is the world's biggest wine tank? Anybody? See, 100,000. That's close, not a little close. We do have a tank that's 100,000 gallons, though. Anybody else? A. We also have 650,000 gallon tanks, but that's not it. Who said B? It is B. So it's 1 million gallons, which when I started there, I said, there's no way. But here's a picture of it. Me and my coworkers, my lovely coworkers, we're there. We're right there if you can't see us. That's the worst tank to manage in the winery, personally. I can never get wine out of it. Next, which state consumes the most wine? Correct, it is California. So I had ChatGPT create me this lovely picture. I don't know how else to use it besides that. So where does red wine get a majority of its color? B, the skin. That's correct. That's where we have all the fun stuff. So next, now that we know about the grape and where wine gets its color, let's dive in a little deeper and talk about the grape. This is where my Super Bowl starts. And so I have a bunch of people who help us in the vineyard, our vineyard techs or grower relations people. They help us get nice, lovely fruit. And so a grape is composed of 4 different things. It has skin, the seeds, the skin, the stem, the seeds, and the pulp. So the stem, we don't really use it. It has bitterness in it. Some winemakers do like to use it for trials and just see if they can add any kind of mouthfeel to their wines. At the scale that I work at, we don't use them. The seeds, we also don't use these. They're kind of just a byproduct of the grape. But when we do press off of our wines, which we'll talk about pressing here shortly, we want to be careful not to press too hard or you will get some bitterness in your juice. Skin. So your skin is where all the fun stuff is. That's your color, your tannins for red wine, and also all the body that you'll get when you taste those red wines. Some white wines, winemakers will ferment on the skins to get a little more mouthfeel. The pulp, this is where all the great stuff that Annie kind of talked about. I don't have to create my sugars. My sugars are just present here in my juice. This is where it all comes and where my yeast get to eat it for fermentation. So now that the grapes are in the winery, let's talk about the processes. So I have white wines, red, rosé, and red. And this is the order they come into in the winery. So white wines, they'll come in, go into a crusher. From the crusher, we'll go into a press. We will then press and then drain out into a fermenter. And again, Super Bowl, that's where it happens. They will then age, and we'll age it in a bottle. We'll go into bottles. Some white wines like Fumé Blanc and Chardonnay are aged in a barrel for some time to get more of that oaky aroma. Rosé is processed just like a white wine, except for we use red grapes. And red wine. So this is where it gets a little different compared to whites. So we go red wine, and then we crush, go into a fermenter with those lovely skins to get our color. We ferment, and then we go into a press or drain once we ferment all the sugar out, and then we go either into barrels or some wines like it's called the Beaujolais Nouveau. They go straight into bottle after harvest. So now that we're going to talk about fermentation, this is where all the action happens for me. So yeast consume sugar. This is also my favorite picture I ever learned in school. So yeast consume sugar, the glucose and the fructose, through a process called glycolysis. If I dive a little bit deeper into that, that's more of a part 2. So the byproduct of this is alcohol and CO2. So if you can see there's all the alcohol, and then they have fizzy little farts for the CO2. So just like you and I, yeast need nutrients, they need vitamins, they need everything to help survive in that fermentation and be able to help get the wine fermented out to 0. So we add nutrients to our fermenters just to make sure they have a nice, healthy environment. And so I keep saying Brix. So Brix is a measurement of sugar and juice, and it's used to determine our final alcohols during fermentation. So some of the white wines we ferment white wines from 54 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit and reds from anywhere from 68 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This is important. You don't want them to get too hot or the yeast will die, and then anything too cold, also yeast don't like it. They're very temperamental. Fermentation times, whites can be anywhere from 5 to 21 days, and reds anywhere from 2 to 14. Depending on the winery you're at, will depend on the velocity that you're moving that juice through your wineries. So now that we've talked about the processes, I want to get into the pillars of chemistry. This is what I look at on the daily, just to kind of keep my wines healthy and stylistically what I need them to be. So the 6 things we look at all the time, every day, are alcohol, pH/TA, residual sugar, which is RS, volatile acidity, or VA, free and total sulfur, which I also refer to as SO2, and CO2O2. So the first one we're going to chat about today is alcohol. So alcohol is converted from sugar in the grapes by yeast during the fermentation process, which we just saw. Wine can range anywhere from 5% to 21%. It's also important for wine quality and style. This will drive a lot of your style drivers that people go to the grocery store and look for those wines that they want every day. So wines with a higher alcohol will tend to be fermented, or the grapes will tend to be picked at a higher sugar, and that's how we get those higher alcohols. Also, but too low of alcohol, you'll start have microbes that like to survive in there because they're like, alcohol's not here to kill me, I can live here. Then we have pH and TA. So this is important for the quality and style. Again, you can see a trend, the quality, the style. So our pH influences fermentation and wine health. So pH determines your SO2 uptake. The lower pH lower pHs inhibit microactivity, and red wines can be anywhere from 3.3 to 3.8, and white wines 3.0 to 3.4. We can adjust it, so we do add acids like malic, lactic, citric, tartaric, and they're all important in different parts of the winemaking process. I do have a chart here for you to see where wine kind of sits and compared to water and coffee, as well as a lemon. So your white wines will be on the more acidic side versus your reds. So residual sugar, RS, this is bricks during harvest, and it's the measurement of the glucose and the fructose in your wine. You can ferment until dry for there to be little or no RS, or you can arrest a ferment, which means we just kill all the yeast when there's some sugar left in there, so you guys have sugars naturally present in your wine. You can also add it via grape concentrate during blending stages. Some winemakers will choose to do that. We can't add table sugar in wines in California. In some states in the US you can, as well as other countries. Like in New Zealand, they can add regular table sugar. It's important for our wine quality and style. The higher RS, though, you'll have an increase of microbes wanting to survive in your wines. And it also does contribute to the sweetness level of those. So the heavier the wine that you feel when you're drinking it, the viscosity, it'll be higher with those wines. Free and total sulfur. So SO2 is added. We use it as a preservative. It's also naturally occurring in a lot of grapes. So it's something that'll be present there regardless if we add it or not. Free SO2, it prevents any kind of oxidation and microbes wanting to grow in there. The uptake in the wine also is dependent on the pH. So the lower the pH, the higher our SO2s, the more uptake of SO2 it'll have. It's important for wine health, the quality, the style, again, that trend we have. High SO2 though, if we're not careful, can be our aromas, lighten their colors, especially in rosés, and tighten mouthfeel. So the low SO2 can also lead to accelerated oxidation and aging. And I have a picture of oxidation on this next slide. So another thing we do is CO2, O2. Like Annie said, it's naturally occurring in ferments, or you can also force carbonate some things. So CO2 is a measurement of your total carbon dioxide in your wines, all the carbonation, so that fizziness you feel when you're drinking your beers and your wines. It's really important in styles like sparkling and white wines. There's different styles in sparkling to get the CO2. Some are forced carbonated, which is here in the United States is called sparkling, and champagne is used by natural yeast fermentations and secondaries to get that CO2. O2 is a measurement of the amount of oxygen in your wine. So this is really important because too much oxygen will turn our wines brown. If you can see by the picture, I don't know if the colors are there, but the fresh one is more red, whereas the oxidized is more of a brick red color. That also is aging too. So over time, your wine and bottle will naturally start to get some oxygen in them. So we mitigate this in our wineries. We have to manage our head spaces and our tanks, so we have to be really careful. So if we have a tank that's halfway full, we will hit the top of the tank with CO2, argon, or nitrogen, which are inert gases. So VA, this is probably the bane of every winemaker's existence. So it's the measurement of wine's gaseous acids. It's produced by acetic acid bacteria, and it creates acetaldehyde, acetic acid, or ethyl acetate. So all of those smell like nail polish remover, vinegar, which I don't know about you guys, but I don't like those in my wines. So the higher the VA, the more spoilage you have. So there are exceptions to this. Some ports, sherry, sauternes, if you've ever had them, do naturally have VA in them, and it's a stylistic it's a style for those wines. We can manage our VA and keep it at bay by managing our SO2s, the temperatures, and managing our head spaces. I also had ChatGPT create this picture, and it's also my favorite. So micro, we have Brettanomyces or barnyard or Band-Aid. I personally like a little bit of Brett in my wines. It's a little bit of earthiness. My winery would not ever allow Brett at the facility. I'd get in trouble. There's mouse. That's produced by lactic acid bacteria. So when you're tasting your wines, if you ever taste like a corn chip, or if any of you have ever had a hamster and you smell that cage at home, that is what you're going to kind of either taste and or smell in your wines. Some people can't smell mouse. So there's only some people who are able to smell and taste it. Then you have TCA and TBA, which is also known as cork taint. This is when we get any kind of chlorine, I would say, in the winery. You'll start to get that cork taint smell. It smells like musty. It's like a grandma's basement, like that you got into as a kid, or it smells like baby carrots. So if you open that little bag and you smell it, that's what TCA smells like. And then reduction, volatile sulfur compounds, which are above your sensory threshold. So it's stuff we can smell. We call H2S, or hydrogen sulfide. It smells like rotten eggs, which is not very good. And then you can also get mercaptans, which smell like cabbage, cooked cabbage, onion, garlic, and skunky smells. Now that we've kept our wine healthy, we want to try to get it to a consumer because that's the best way to sell it. So after fermentation, red wines will go into barrels or other oak alternatives. I do have pictures here. Not all wineries have the capability to have barrels. So we have chips, which they rig them in tanks, and they hang almost in like a bag that's made for tea, and they steep them on there. And then there's also staves, which are essentially barrels just broken apart, and you can hook them onto the sides of the tank. This is where a winemaker really gets to use their art forms of winemaking versus science. So red wines can be anywhere in a barrel from 12 to 24 months, and whites anywhere from 3 to 6. The wines that we typically put in there, like I said, are Chardonnay or Fumé Blanc. A Fumé Blanc is a Sauvignon Blanc that's aged on oak. So they add flavor compounds. So whenever you see a wine label that says with flavors of, with aromatics of, like clove, nutmeg, spice, those are naturally occurring compounds in those barrels that once you age on there, they get released into your wines. So types of barrels we use are French oak, which give you clove, nutmeg, sweet spice, and vanilla. And then you have different oaks, American oak, which is coconut, sweet spice, and more vanilla. Everyone loves their vanilla in their wines. Different toasts include medium toast, heavy toast, a lot of stuff. We don't age too many things in heavy toast. A lot of like bourbons and stuff like that will get into those heavy toast barrels. So once we've made it out of the barrel, once we've made it all healthy, it's time to bottle. So you can see red wines anywhere in the market from 18 to 24 months after harvest, and whites anywhere as close to 6 months. And then you guys get to all enjoy it. And so at the end, I guess we're answering questions. Okay.
Any of this stuff, I am completely non-technical. Hey, it works. All right. So this is me. I got into distilling. It was a very strange tangent off of everything else that I did. I was a martial artist, and I was very into Asian culture, and I started a koi pond because I thought koi were really cool. And they started dying, and I needed to save my fish because I spent a ridiculous amount of money on koi. And so I studied about koi, and you need to warm the water, salt the water in order to increase their metabolism so they can get healthy. Heating thousands of gallons of water is very expensive. Salting water also kills everything around it. So I had to put them in a large tank. They started heating the tank, and boy, I'm really off. Okay, so distilled spirit starts with water. Short story is I was able to warm them up. I was able to save about a tenth of them. And during the process, using biomass and a variety of different heating methods, I ran into steam. Steam led to a steam engine I built in India. And then moved on to distillation. So water has been a concern my entire life. I was sure 30 years ago we were going to have the issues that we're having today in the world around water. I used different methods to purify water, biological. So I created bog filters, and then that transformed into aquaponic systems. You might be familiar with that. It's aquaculture and agriculture kind of combined. So you're using fish waste in order to feed the plants, but the plants clean the water for the fish. So purification, yeah, lifelong study. And then I started moving into various other forms of purification. So ozone treatment, I found that UV didn't actually kill anything, and it didn't really remove anything, where ozone was much more effective and left no toxins in the water. And then activated carbon was an excellent filter media. So while we were playing with all of these things, a friend of mine said, well, you know, it takes a lot less energy to distill ethanol than it does to distill water. I said, okay, show me how to do that. And we did a sugar wash and started creating fuel ethanol. And fuel ethanol, any ethanol, distilled is illegal to produce. And I said, oh, okay, so I need to get a license. I need to get a permit. And then getting the permit, I had to decide what I wanted to do. And I settled on rum because it's very simple to ferment. I don't have to do everything Andy has to do. I don't have all of the finishing that wine has to do. All I have to do is produce that ethanol and extract it. And running down that path, I looked at and discovered that distilleries were really how breweries and wineries were able to preserve that stock that was going to go bad if it didn't get drank. And so they distilled it into ethanol at a higher ABV, store it in a barrel, and the value goes up instead of turning into vinegar and losing it. Rum, I picked rum. I went through a liquor store to figure out what to make, and I picked rum because it was almost the smallest section in the liquor store. I was looking at things from an entrepreneurial point of view, and whiskey was a huge section. It takes a long time to produce a good whiskey. Vodka is like a Camaro. Everyone's got one, and it's really about marketing and chemistry. You know, it's producing pure ethanol and water. The definition of vodka in the United States is flavorless and odorless. That didn't sound appealing to me. I wanted something that tastes good if I'm going to do it, because I looked at the economics of producing fuel ethanol, which is worth $5 a gallon, and potable spirits worth about $200 a gallon. Well, I can buy a lot of gas with a few gallons of whiskey, right? And so I started running down the tangent with rum, and of course it's made from sugarcane, and learned about its history, where it came from, and then I really liked the idea that there was very little regulation around rum. Basically, it has to be made from sugarcane. That's it. It's like, awesome. I'm about as authoritarian as you can get. I hate rules, and if you do give me rules, I will find a way around them if I can. And so if there aren't a lot of rules, I get to make up my own, and that's what I've done. I've gone away from traditional rums. If you've seen our products, I have cranberry rum. Well, that's not terribly Caribbean, you know, and so it's very non-traditional. I do have the traditional ones, and they do sell well, but I like to not compete with others. So I produce products that nobody else does. I've found, or actually been introduced to materials and fruits that even the TTB didn't know about. I had to provide documentation that it was grass, or generally recognized as safe. It was safe enough to use. We're the first, I think the first, well, anybody to use candy cat mushrooms in the United States in anything, because I had to prove it was safe to use. And then they called me up and say, hey, is it okay if we use this and give it to other people? And so it's fun to have things that nobody else does. So rum was the underdog. Naturally complements fruits and spices, and so on. Distillation, they guys do the hard work. My job is really easy. Distillation is just separating it. I heat it up, different compounds evaporate at different temperatures, take off the bad stuff, collect the good stuff, and then what comes off later, I mix in with the head. So the heads, hearts, and tails are your cuts. Heads are a lot of volatiles, has the ethyl acetate that you mentioned. Smells like acetone, so it's really easy to detect in the first distillation. When that smell goes away, I can no longer taste it. Then I start collecting hearts. The hearts are the part that we age or infuse. And then it starts to smell kind of like wet socks or cardboard, and then I stop collecting hearts. And so out of a 500-gallon fermentation, I get about 50 gallons of good product that I can use. There's your cuts. Infusion or aging. So when I studied this, I talked to a lot of people. I prefer to talk to experts in their fields. The fermentation, that was an interesting experience, and there's a lot of misinformation. There's old moonshiners that would take a piece of toast and they put a piece of meat on it and then would float it in their fermentation, and that was supposed to feed it. Well, it just turned into something that smelled like bile. And they used to put dynamite, literally sticks of dynamite, into a fermentation if they got a stuck fermentation. Well, they figured that, or they learned that it was the nitroglycerin that stimulated the yeast and got it going again. But when you distill it, you get that nitro. So you got the nastiest hangover that you'd ever get. So I had to learn how to ferment. And I started, with the simplest, just basic sugar, turbo yeast, and produced fuel. I wanted to produce something that was good. So I started doing a lot of research. I ended up talking to Dr. Clayton Cohn, who's a very well-known fermentation expert. And his first response to my email is, "What's your degree in?" I said, "Hard knocks." He said, "Well, why should I help you?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to know everything you know. I want to be able to ferment molasses." And I gave him all the research that I had done, because I had gone down the rabbit hole and looked at Rafael Arroyo's patent on heavy rum fermentation, how he went from using dunder to isolating the bacteria that was responsible for those esters. And so he's able to get a consistent process. And I tracked down that strain of bacteria at a lab, and I was able to purchase that, send it to another lab to have it propagated. And then I was able to reproduce that fermentation. And so he was impressed that I was able to do all of this stuff on my own. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to give you a basic fermentation protocol. Follow that. Let me know how it goes. And then share your information with me on what you've been working on." And so we went back and forth for the first year, and I was able to produce a consistent quality product. And that's the basis for all of our rum. I'm going to go back to that heavy rum in the next year or two to start looking at that. It'd be a crazy expensive, because talk about length of fermentation. My fermentation takes 5 days. And then we distill, we have another week. The fermentation with the bacteria takes about 3 months. So having that take up my space would make it a very expensive bottle of rum. So we'd go from a $50 bottle of rum to probably a $150 bottle. And so that'll be for a future project. But then we have infusion or aging. Traditionally, rums are aged in used barrels. Trying to get a consistent source of used barrel as a small distiller is virtually impossible. And I needed a consistent flavor profile. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to go with new barrels. And so I use new American oak charred barrels, so basically a bourbon barrel. And so my gold rum, rather than tasting like a traditional rum, tastes more like a bourbon. So it gave us a unique flavor profile. We got crossover from the whiskey guys because they really liked it. And I was able to break some of the stigma around rum. A lot of people, "Oh, I hate rum." I sell a lot of rum to people that hate rum. And because of all the different styles. We also do our cuts differently. I don't go into the tails as far, so I don't have what they call that funk. It's a very clean rum. A lot of people compare it to tequila at times. And then, of course, our aged rum, they'll compare to a bourbon. But then we also do a lot of infusions. So of the traditional rums that we do a silver at 90 proof and 155 proof. And then we do a gold at 80 and 120 proof. And then we do a dark rum, which took me about 5 years to figure out, because all rum distillers lie. They say it just comes out of the barrel like that. It doesn't come out that way. So you have to add things. And so infusion. So I get in arguments. I go online and I watch people talking about my product. It's kind of fun to kind of sit there and watch for a while. And then I say, "Hey, I actually make that. What are you doing here?" And they'll say, "Well, we want a pure rum." I said, "Well, then you have to drink it right out of the still, because as soon as I put it in a barrel, it's becoming contaminated by that wood. It's infusing tannins and vanillins. And so it's an infusion. A gold rum, barrel-aged rum, is still an infusion as far as I'm concerned. Pure rum comes right out of the still. You add water to it, you are changing it, the flavor and everything. So vodka, is 60% water. You really affect the flavor when you add water. If you don't have good water, or they'll adjust their waters to, you know, they'll add salt or sugar or something. And you can do that under a certain amount. It's like 2%, and you don't have to put it on your bottle. And so they're able to adjust their flavor profile and get that differentiation that they're after by adjusting their water content or water quality. And so we make our silver rum. We have to add water. And in the previous slide, you kind of see what I do. I go through a lot of purification, a lot of effort to clean that water up. And that's what we proof with. But then we also do a lot of infusions. And when I started this process and I started using commercial extracts, and everything tasted awful. So I had to figure out why. When you buy food flavorings, by law, they have to taste bad. They have to have a gag factor. So like if you ever tasted vanilla extract out of the bottle, it tastes awful. It has to, by law, or they can't sell it to you. Or they have to pay the federal excise tax, which I pay. So I asked the TTB, do I have to use these? And they say, no, you can make your own. And so that's the road that I've traveled now. I use real vanilla beans. I use real fruit. I use a lot of local fruit. Anybody calls me up, there's a small orchard that has quince. So we have a quince rum. I have lemons from Red Bluff. I've got figs from Modesto. I try and use as much local or relatively local produce as possible to create our products. And that's the infusion. And so now you have hydrodiffusion, which is like a gin basket. I went back east. I went through the Bourbon Trail, and I hung out with a lot of moonshiners. And they were about distillation. So they would throw it on the pot. They were literally hacking up pumpkin and throwing it in the pot and distilling it. And it was awful. And I felt so bad because I tasted, these are really nice people, and I'm tasting it. And I said, please, just a tiny taste, you know, and it was so bad. Yeah, that's great stuff. So I learned that if you want the true flavor, well, you put it in later. And so I do what's called cold infusion. I infuse our fruit, spices after distillation. Alcohol is an excellent solvent. It'll extract all the flavor, the essential oils, the color. So if you look at our rums, we have a lot of very colorful rums, and that's because it's cold infused. That alcohol reaches in there, pulls out that flavor, then we press it, and then we settle it, filter it, and then you have the truest possible infusion. And I've learned also there's double extraction. So using ethanol and water, you get even more flavor out of different fruits and botanicals than you would do just with alcohol infusion. Proofing. So something we have to do is we have to be within 1/100th of a percent on our proof. I have to, and it's almost impossible. So you can see I have 2 lab stills, and for every batch that we produce, I do double distillation on those lab stills. And if they're close enough, I'll use that, and I'll use that as my proof, and it's acceptable by the TTB. And so obscured products, so anything that has sugars in it, has to be distilled, and then you add back the liquid that is left in the still, and then you take your proof. Unobscured, so our white rums, gold rum, those are considered unobscured. We can just measure that with a hydrometer. Bottling, we have to have precise measure, so we have to be within less than half a milliliter, something like that. So we have to calibrate our bottling machines every single time. So documentation and record keeping is outrageously complex with the distillation world. And I'm a guy that hates to write anything down. I hate rules. So this was a very difficult path for me to follow. Labeling. This one isn't so bad because I really like making new things. And so I have to produce a formula. So anything that isn't a standard product, so like a silver rum, a gold rum, a brandy, a whiskey, they have categories for those. And I don't have to provide a formula as long as we don't stray outside of that category. But 90% of our products do. And so I have to tell them how we make the base material, which is our rum, and then how much of each additional product we're adding in. So like the one that's here is our apple. That's a really simple formula because we add in X amount of apples and rum. And then we have our formula. We submit that. Then I submit the label. And the label has to have, everything has to be accurate down to punctuation, which drives me nuts. And the description has to be within their parameters. So what we call the puffery can't make any claims that stray outside of that particular category. Reasons for starting the business, concerns over water issues. Distillation is another way of water purification amongst others. And so that's why I kind of ran down this tangent. Concerns over fuel issues. Ethanol is a fuel. It can be used for cooking. It can be used for primary moving, so steam. Research and personal education. I like to learn things. I'm always studying. Cal can tell you, she'll see me 2 o'clock in the morning and I'll be learning about something. I sleep about an hour at a time. Food preservation and waste. Ethanol is an excellent preservative because it's antiseptic. And so those are calories as well. Obviously, there's a consequence for overindulgence, but it does work well for food preservation and tinctures and botanical extraction. So medicinal purposes, you can create a lot of different products with ethanol other than distilled spirits. And then economical stability. There will always be a market for ethanol or alcohol. That's it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you to our guests. Now we would like to take some questions. So if you wouldn't mind, I know you just sat down. We do have some chairs if you'd like to sit. I also can even bring a third one, unless you just prefer to stand. Okay. And I will walk around if you just want to raise your hand. I'll also see if, I think Dr. Coiner's out there, if you could check and see if we had any questions online as well.
What's the acronym TTB?
TTB. Yeah, there you go. And name.
Last name.
Oh,
The only reason we found this out was because we had 2 investigators. And they both same last, okay, that's. And I was like, strange that you're right, or it's the name given because you are a TTB investigator. He goes, you figured that out really quick. Because you get one, so you don't realize it. They regulate alcohol and tobacco products.
if you screw up the ATF.
Annie, I've got a question for you. I know you talked about the differences in the way they process the barley, but as far as from beer to beer, how much do the strains of barley change?
They do. Families of barley, 6 rows. New. Water is a barley that comes out of the UK, and all certainly different.
I should add that all of these bulbs are highly modified selective breeding. If you were to find the original bark, it would be way. We've been selecting for high level.
I have two questions. First one is, where do you get your water, particularly for the beer and for the rum? And the second one is, do you do tours in your facilities?
Was shallow. We had to. That's why we an extension. I use ozone that that's in it. It precipitates out, and then I use string filters to remove any carbon, any potential chemicals that might be in there. So, and it goes through like 4 before it finally makes a product. Ozone is constantly running 24 hours a day. Yeah, I don't like, but it's what I have to work with.
That's similar for us now too. There are brewers that have really lovely water sources and they can use just direct from the groundwater. We are in downtown Coos Bay, so our philosophy is to start with water that's pretty controlled, add what we want. So in addition to using the classic water, yeast, barley, hops ingredients, we'll add calcium and things like that for each individual beer to get the chemical makeup that we want.
Okay, Crystal, you're on.
Okay, she had told me that that mic picks it up if they're right there. I can run back and forth though. It's okay. No, it's I don't hear it on their end, so I just was going by IT. Okay, so tours. Yeah. It's okay. Here you go.
Tours. So anytime we release a new beer, we have a release party, which is usually on a Friday, and our brewers will be pouring samples of the beer, and then anybody that wants at that point can request a tour, and one of the brewers will bring you back to the brewery.
Yeah, we do tours by appointment. And then if you come into the distillery, we have multiple locations. So we have Bandon, Florence, and then Reedsport is where the distillery actually exists now. We have a tasting room there. And so if it's not busy and you come into the tasting room, we'll give you the nickel tour. And then we do also scheduled tours where we'll have 20, 30 people come in, and usually a little bit longer and more involved when we explain the process more.
My winery does not do tours. We are in Modesto. We have several facilities throughout the valley. So we have a location in Fresno, Modesto, Lodi, and then some coastal sites in the north coast of Napa. And then we also have a distillation plant out in Modesto as well.
Is anybody else here? Oh, Win. Hold on. Okay. Okay.
The ice flavor fruits that aren't actually in what process?
So we had a question involving the flavor with the wood and how does that affect, and the fruit when they state those different types of flavors, what goes into that and making it happen?
So it can come from several things. So one, our yeast also, it's a byproduct. So the different kinds of strains of yeast we use. The grape itself have different kinds of aromatics and flavors, as well as they're known as esters or terpenes and that kind of stuff. And those are naturally occurring compounds within the grape that are released during fermentation, where you get some of those blackberries and Sauvignon Blancs. It's like the green and all the peppers that you get. Those are your terpenes. Esters are your fruitier compounds. So like blackberry, blueberry, all those. Very complex, but simple at the same time.
For beer, it's similar. There's a lot of esters and different compounds and aromatics that do not necessarily come from pine, but you might get it from the hops, from the yeast, and even from the malt. I imagine same thing with you.
Yeah, distillation removes a lot of flavor. So the barrel contributes a lot of vanilla notes, and then of course the oakiness and the tannins. But in all of our infused and in the silver rums, there's esters that are produced by the yeast, and so you'll get a sweet, fruity note, almost sometimes banana note, in our silver rum. But then my infusions are intense. So when you taste the cranberry, it's like getting punched in the face with cranberry. I like flavor because I don't drink that much. I sip, and literally a shot, that's it. It'll be all night. And so I want to taste it. And so when you use our products, like in cocktails and things like that, it doesn't take very much. But those fruit, we put it there.
I think we had one kind of in the middle there. I'm going to walk around because it's easier if I not go down the stairs. And Jeff, you can definitely take over this one if you'd like. Thanks. I think we had a couple right.
I have two questions. I know back in the 70s in Eastern Washington, it was full of hops farms. Why did they go away from using hops so much for beer?
My knowledge, they have the amount of hops that have been planted in the United States has been skyrocketing in the last 20 years. So if there's specific areas that were growing hops that are no longer growing hops, that's not necessarily a nationwide trend. It might just be that in that particular area, they switched to something more profitable or the climate changed in a way that wasn't amenable to hops. But hop production has gone insane along with the rise of India Pale Ales. So how many people here like India Pale Ales? How many people think that they have been way blown out of proportion? Yeah. I love IPAs, but dang, like we went too far. So actually we're starting to see hop farmers not having the insane demand for hops as they have over the last 20 years, but that's a very recent trend from the last 2 or 3 years. And it's because people are finally realizing that things like Pilsners and Pales and lagers are also quite lovely and not as bad for you because they're not as alcoholic. I didn't. She asked if I brought any samples, and unfortunately we didn't. Yeah. Anyone else?
No, we insured admin when I first came up with this idea. Well, no, it wasn't my idea. Actually, I think we had a conversation with Professor Morelli and to get this here, but we ensured that admin, we would not be bringing any alcohol on the premises. So unfortunately, that was not going to be I just wanted to give anybody else a last minute chance. Dr. Corner, do we have anybody online questions or? Okay. I believe if it wasn't already announced, we'll make sure that contact information for each of our guests are put up. And just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to our guests for coming up and being able to share all your information with us. Thank you to all of you. If you didn't get a chance to sign in, it does help us with kind of tracking how many people attend these types of events. It's up front. I kind of had things set up a little bit later than normal. It is up there now. There's also some program information from various programs we have here at the college, not all of them, including our one that I meant to announce earlier was our new marine biology program that we're super excited about. That's not out there, but you can find that information online, including one of the programs that I had mentioned earlier about the new diesel tech program that I'm involved with. If you go on the website, you'll be able to read a little bit about it. With that said, thank you again for everyone for coming.
flyers for Stillwagon Distillery out on the table, so you're welcome to take them. I also, if you answered the question, have prizes.
I got them all right.
They're not wine.
Yes, we have prizes. I don't know where one.
John?
Yes.
I'm interested in.